Good evening from the somewhat chilly southern Spain. I've got some very active pups beneath my feet, of course, the moment I hit go live. Typical. Anywho, it's good to have you here, Blaze, Zeroni. Welcome, it's good to have you all here. I appreciate it. Let me make this bigger and let me show you what we've been up to today. We've been playing with my Trias disciflora. Happy birthday, late happy birthday to your son, Fernanda. Thank you so much for being here. And Orchid Ninja Chris San, I should be able to see you. And why do I not see your message? Good evening, Anita Brown. It's good to have you. Welcome. So I'll go back to my YouTube side so that I can see Chris San's messages. I hope everybody had a fabulous day, is still having a great day, is possibly having, well, maybe lunchtime now, something like that. If I am white noise, so happy to be white noise. I do really well, white noise styly. Hey Joshi, it's good to have you. Sandy's Orchids, hi, welcome. This is amazing. Trias disciflora. Well, since I've had this orchid, I've been looking back and back to see, Trias, not familiar with it. But it turns out they put the label as the synonym for bulbophyllum disciflorum. Anyway, for me, it's Trias disciflora. So this bloom has opened, and you can see I had some fun and games in the sun playing with my orchid. Now, if I didn't put my finger there, we would actually just be seeing her, drooping down, protecting herself with that top sepal. But I have to tell you, the fragrance of this orchid is like freshly cut grass. I was a little bit hesitant to put my nose in there just because, a little bit paranoid here. And I thought, I'm not smelling anything. It's very spring-like, not as springy as the lip would assume, that bouncy little thing there. But yeah, it has this fragrance of fresh spring and cut grass. Very pleasant, very, very faint. You really have to stick your nose in it. So I thought I would show you a little opening loop that one day will feature in a Blooms For You video. But I've been having some fun. Now, the disciflora is because the lip is supposed to have a disc shape. And while I've been checking blooms, because I thought, well, it doesn't look like a lip, it's more elongated. So I checked to see if I maybe got a mislabeled orchid, but no, I suppose there's variations with the size of the lip and the broadness of it. I just happen to have an elongated one. This orchid came to me from Afri Orchids a year ago. She was a challenge, and you can see 3 little shriveled pseudobulbs there, which only shriveled after the next 2 or 3 growths that she gave me. So she's doing fabulously. All she is is placed, because there wasn't a root system, I placed her on a bed of Akadama and grit, and it is a semi-hydro setup, and she is a warm to hot grower that likes a lot of humidity. Now, warm to hot I can do only for 70-80% of my year. High humidity only during the colder months of the year, like now. So this was a challenge. Yes, she is indoors all the time. While she was settling in, Joshi, when I just placed her on the media, she was outside to keep it as hot as possible, not in direct sun at all. She's in the blooming alley on the lower shelf, always in bright, bright shade. But I thought to settle her in, it's best to get her as hot as possible. That seemed to have worked. But once she got established, I brought her inside just to make sure that I don't make a mistake. She's tiny. The size of her bloom is pretty large in comparison to the orchid itself. That's nice, because as she presents herself flopping down, I must say that it's a little bit like, yeah, it's a difficult one to photograph. I don't know if this loop is of interest that much longer, but if you like, I can switch that off and we can have a little look-see at some images. Let me go to some images and get your feedback, and we can sort of scroll through these images. And I'm going to have to figure out where you guys are. There you are. Okay, if I don't see chat for a moment, bear with me. I just want to make sure that I get the image on screen fully. There we go. Okay, so just for a little stint of photography, I brought her outside, but you can see the proportion of the bloom in comparison to the entire plant. And she is not that big. I mean, the plant isn't that big. So let's go down to the next one. This is how she presents herself normally. As you know, maybe have to put a toothpick underneath. Got to lift her up a little bit so we can see the detail. I love how the pollinia is sticking out like a spur, like it's in your face. So the moment that the pollinator hits her on the lip, it would literally bounce her up. I'm sure that pollinia is not very stable. If I were to touch and fiddle around too much, it's going to pop out, I think, catasetum style. And that is why I just thought, no, just, stop with the fun and games. But her colors look pretty bright in the images. They're very true. Maybe the lip could be a little richer red, but the representation is pretty close. You can see that bloom is pretty big. So eventually when this orchid gets to a more mature size, I'm hoping for maybe more of these blooms that smell like freshly cut grass. I'm just hoping that I don't see anything in the background that I missed to remove. I have since removed all the dead pseudobulbs. They came off relatively easy with old dead roots attached and all. So she's been trouble-free. Only been fertilizing her at 100 parts per million, and not, she's more calcium and magnesium and seaweed, very weak, not even 100. I've been, mixing my 100 parts per million CalMag, but then I would give it 50. So she's been very weakly treated up until now, but she's fully rooted in. And I have high hopes for this little one. And you see how that pollinia sticks out? I love that. But if I were to mess too much or slip of the finger, I'm sure I would totally mess it up. Let me zoom in, because what I found so fascinating about this one as well is how tiny, if I'm not mistaken, how tiny the petals are. Oops, let's get you down. Look at the petals. Absolutely tiny. Just, sort of unnecessary formation there. But isn't this remarkable? When I saw the bouncy lip, I had to go and double check, because when I get a new orchid in, I just need to know temperature and humidity conditions, etc. I don't go messing about with the blooms because I've been so disappointed in the past with, you know, thinking I bought something and then that blooms and I have no clue what the bloom is. So I've just been waiting for her to bloom, and I'm very surprised to already get a bloom out of her, seeing as she's not even established fully a year. Wrong, sorry, she's established more than a year, so scratch everything I just said. But I'm still surprised with the little structures. You know, she doesn't have that many structures that she can pull a bloom out like that. But yeah, I wasn't too keen on checking. But when I saw that elongated lip, I knew what I saw when I ordered her, and that's why I was fascinated by her, because I liked the disc shape of the lip. But since then, nothing. So she bloomed out, and I was immediately thinking, no, this is not what I ordered. And then, well, here we are. It is a disciflora, or a bulbophyllum disciflorum. All right, let me just check the chat here, just to make sure I don't lose track of you. One bulbo trying to grow indoor now. All right, which bulbophyllum is that? I hope it's one that smells like watermelon. And 4 bulbos also indoors. Yeah, Blaze, you have told me about your bulbos. When I started my collection, I was starting to focus only on bulbos, but after I received the first 2, I must say that I realized very, very quickly after the first 2 that this would be a challenging genus for me to grow. I was going to seriously target my entire collection on bulbos and then have a few other things scattered around, because I love the blooms. I love how intricate and different they are. Yeah, Chris, I have to say with bulbos, if the conditions are not just so, and if they're not, let's say, robust, maybe I'm getting away with it with mine because she is small. Now, I ordered a Medusa back in the day. It turns out it was an Elizabeth Ann Buckleberry, but that was very disappointing. But that's supposed to be a bigger orchid. I don't have, as a matter of fact, any luck even with the Elizabeth Ann Buckleberry, because her conditions are not ideal. She's growing, but if you look at the size of the leaves, you would think, you know, she's a miniature orchid, so she's not happy. But I don't want to ask anybody if they want my Buckleberry. You know, you don't. I like to give orchids away that I also like, but you know, if somebody were ever to say, I want that bulbophyllum, I'll be okay, your address, and she'd be shipped off. So yeah, somebody got orchids. Woohoo! That's great. The orchid giver from Joshi. Okay, so orchid myths are on the cards tonight. I know I put that into the title yesterday, and what I'm going to do is just keep our little friend here on a loop. Take out the music, and then I don't feel like I'm shouting. Frozen, I hope not. Oh, I hope they didn't get frozen. But then I can pull up the chat on YouTube, which is also much better for me, clean up my desk, and we'll go into some orchid myths, which I wanted to actually talk to you about, you know, yesterday, but then I wasn't feeling 100%, and I was very concerned to miss out on a sunny day today, which we had, and all the kiddos went outside, and then they came back in. But yeah, anyway, so we have ourselves no sound. You can't hear me. You can't hear me speak. Don't tell me you can't hear me speak. Can you hear me talking? Oh, please don't tell me that, because all my settings are according to sound. All I've done is switched off the background music. Oh, thank you, Joshi, very much. You can't hear me, Fernanda? I've only switched off the background music, nothing else. All right, maybe Fernanda, if you refresh your, okay, you can hear me. Whew, thank goodness for that. Excuse me while I have a drink. I need myself a little water after that one. Thank you. Now they say when you've got a little bit of a scratchy throat, you shouldn't drink ice water, but I have this knack of iced lemon water all the time. I love that stuff, and I shouldn't use it during the winter, obviously, but I can't stop drinking iced water. I like my ice. I guess that's something that was instilled into me since I was in the American high school. The Americans love their ice. Anyway, so orchid myths, so many out there. I've taken a few that are a little bit more obvious. Probably everybody in the room today knows the answers to them. Maybe not everybody, or maybe somebody has a different take. And once again, know that at any point in time, you can raise your hand, you can shout me down, what you can do to get my attention, like literally, so that my name highlights and my eyes are drawn to your comment or question, is write in @Ninja Orchids, then type in whatever you're going to say, and it will flash up in orange on my screen. That means that it's so much easier then for me to see, because if I get on a roll and I'm starting to talk, then it is possible, like I did the other night, I have to scroll back, and I was hoping I didn't miss anybody. I hate that. So right now our numbers aren't that big, which is fine. It keeps it nice and cozy. The canapes are out at the front. I hope everybody found something. You see, even the buffet table isn't razored because it's just us. But if in future the chat gets a little bit more active, then I need to be able to see me. And if you just type my name in, it highlights it and put the @ symbol in front of that, okay? But anyway, first of all, before we go to a myth, I wanted to bring you a little orchid fun fact. And I've got notes. So if I sound like I'm reading, it is because I'm reading. With a foggy brain, I don't want to start messing around with finding my words. Hey, Lucy the cat, look who's here. Stealth mode, like a little cat. How are you? It's so good to see you. Thank you for coming in. This is Bulbo disciflorum, or Trias disciflora, which is a synonym. I bought her as Trias. It's her first bloom ever, and I had a sunny day today, so I was playing with my orchids, as you do. Anyway, so I have this wonderful, Lucy, if you haven't heard everything I mentioned, you can interrupt me at any given point in time. What I say isn't gospel. I talk about my experience and what I would advise, and being that there are so many experiences out there, everybody can chime in. And on top of that, everybody who wants to come up on panel, if you want to come up and have a chat and let us hear your voice, then feel free to let me know. Yes, and she smells like cut grass, very spring, fresh fragrance. Very, very good. It's pleasant to the nose, but it's extremely faint. So I had to be brave to stick my nose in there. I was a little hesitant. But yeah, if you want to come up, I can put a link into the chat, and then up you come, and then we can hear your voice as well. We can join in on the conversation. Okay, so one fun orchid fact that I found while looking around for this subject, which I was going to do as a video, but I think this also fits better for a live. Anyway, the early Greek parents believed they could control the gender of their unborn children with orchid roots. If the father ate large new tubers, and we're talking terrestrials here, I guess, the child would be male. If the mother ate small tubers, the child would be female. And European scholars believe that orchids sprang from the ground on which animals had bred. Again, fertility, because we do know the Greek stem of orchis is a male part, which I'm going to just put out there like that, because YouTube's algorithm will pick up on certain words, and processing takes long enough as it is. So it's all about fertility and these orchids. So when it comes to did evolve, like, you know, myths, when we talk about old wives' tales, so many times we have little rhymes and things that ring true even to this day, especially back in the day with farmers. So the thing with these wives' tales, if they're not documented properly, they tend to evolve. They can tend to start to get exaggerated. And it could be that with all the things that we're hearing about orchids and grow care do's and don'ts and this and that there are some myths that have now gotten mixed in, even though it's perfectly fine to do whatever it is. So I think that myths also evolve, right? So one of the myths that I sort of had to laugh at, and I feel so bad because not everybody is in a position that we're in, talking about orchids and growing them, but there's a myth out there that orchids are carnivorous. And I want to hear your opinion. Are orchids carnivorous? I mean, when I say I had to laugh, I mean, is that an obvious question or is that a joke? Because I've heard it being said out on the interwebs. I won't exactly say YouTube, but close enough. So interwebs. Let me know if you think orchids are carnivorous. It's not a trick question, because we know how orchids have evolved with the relationship to the bloom, about pollination, etc. All right, I'm not sure about my lag tonight, but anyway, so they are in actual fact not carnivorous. Insects of various kinds, however, are important in orchid pollination, and many orchids pollinated by luring insects to them, and then the insect transport the pollen to another orchid. We know that. The relationship between insects and orchids is a necessity, but that does not make them eat insects. Yes. Hey, Brea. Woohoo. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. Yes, and a lot of people think that paths are because of the pouch. Quite rightly so. That is correct. And the thing is, now, I have to be very, very careful. I didn't dig much deeper. There is one orchid that apparently has sort of a sticky substance. I've put that orchid on one of my community posts. It's a video which I shared. The substance is so sticky that the insect can't get out and keeps falling back into the pouch, and then it dies. But I don't think at this point in time that specific orchid would actually absorb the insect as nutrients. Instead, the insect has done its job and has the pollinia on its back, and all the substance that down there is where the pollinia needs to go in order to form a seed pod. So I think there's a little bit of let's say, a melting pot of opinions about that orchid. But when I saw that video, I stumbled upon this comment as well, saying that orchids are carnivorous. And actually, in actual fact, they're not. It's a very cool video, and it's way back down in my community posts. So another myth, and to be honest with you, probably 20 years ago, I believed that this was a fact. Another myth is orchids grow only in hot tropical weather. And believe it or not, I believed that because I had no idea about anything else except where I was growing orchids, and it was hot and it was tropical. And when I mentioned this in the past, when I came to Germany for my studies, my brain could not assimilate clear blue skies with cold weather. So that was like, if you think of culture shock, that was the worst thing for me to wrap my head around, that I couldn't go out on my bicycle with wet hair in October, November, and not come home with a headache and it's freezing cold outside. Absolutely ridiculous. But I honestly and truly believed orchids only grow in hot tropical weather. Clearly, we know now that they don't. That is obvious. Also yesterday, they grow all the way up to Greenland, where they have 5 species growing up by the Arctic Circle. And then, of course, the little fun fact around there, The only continent where orchids have not been found, and in my notes I've put yet, is Antarctica. It wouldn't surprise me if one day we found some fossils and Antarctica indeed had some orchids at some point in time. They just haven't been found yet, my opinion. Another one, let me know what you think. Joshi, you are in the business. Orchids are expensive. That is always a relevant question. And that is a myth that is out there. Orchids are expensive and only wealthy people can grow them as an add-on. It is my opinion that orchids are expensive depending on what you're getting. Even, let's say, the most common orchid out there, the phalaenopsis, while they are cheaper than many other orchids, I find that they are extremely expensive if the quality is rubbish. So it's to put that out as a myth. I find we need to debunk that, because yes, orchids are expensive and they have always been expensive. While they have gotten cheaper over the decades, it doesn't mean that the prices haven't actually gone up, especially when we talk about shipping and stuff. I would say that if I knew what I was going through now, probably in 2017, 2018, I wouldn't contemplate buying a collection in order to take care of them, because maybe the orchid, you can get a seedling for 10 euros, $12 or something like that. Keeping it alive and everything that goes around the orchid hobby, that is super expensive, in my opinion. So maybe the commodity isn't, but then the rest that surrounds the hobby is super expensive. But that is my opinion. If you if you have another perspective, and also if you have any tips on how to, make it less expensive, like moving to the tropics or buying orchids that are great for your area, that is an option, because then there's not that much upkeep necessary. The climate will do it all for you. Just a thought. I personally would love to move to the tropics. Start again, and I'll take you up into the trees, and I'll be complaining about monkeys and everything that they have thrown onto my ground overnight. But the price has been going up by a bit, but not like Hoyas and other indoor plants like philodendrons. Yeah, oh gosh. Chris San, we're moving into the tropics. I've got you. We're going to have an orchid compound for sure. So Hoyas and philodendrons have been going nuts since 2020, as far as I can, make an educated guess. Not that I'm on top of that subject at all, but I am surprised that Hoyas are more expensive, seeing as they're relatively easy to propagate, but that's my ignorance talking maybe, so I apologize for that. Orchids stayed fairly in the same price range. Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad. At least in the United States, that is still being balanced out. So Chris Sun is already on the list for the orchid compound that we're going to have, exclusive retreat. And it's going to be called Orchid Ninjas, whether you like it or not, because not only can orchid ninjas live there, but if you are prepared to uproot yourself and move to a compound where there's only orchids, then, well, you are definitely an orchid ninja. Oh, gosh. Okay, Sandy's on the list as well. We're filling up nicely. We're going to have to consider how many hectares we want to have. We're going to have to make sure that we're going to keep our orchids secure. That would be awesome. And have a lot of insect repellent on hand. We might need to get a sponsor for insect repellents. Okay, another one that I find is, it goes out as a myth, and I find that that is just so disheartening and discouraging. Yay. Oh, put my feet into that sand under that umbrella, Chris Sun, for sure, is that orchids are hard to grow. So people throwing out sentences like that, I find that it's immediately you're putting a wrench into anybody's ambition to want to get into orchids. Now, You know, everything is hard to grow as far as I'm concerned if you don't care for it properly. I mean, you don't care for your pets properly, then you're going to have all sorts of issues, and off to the vet you go, or even yourself if you don't take care of yourself. It's I don't like this, and I would like to debunk this. I don't want to say orchids are hard to grow. I think that many people who believe this to be true. 22 hours. Excuse me, my friend here telling me what time it is. I'm sorry, I should have muted him. If many people believe this to be true, then we're not going to get that many people to actually become involved in orchid growing. I hope my sound is still okay. I muted my friend over here. I find that we make the mistake from the moment that we buy orchids. That's when it becomes a problem. If we don't do our research, not hard to grow, but easy to kill. That's a good one, Lucy. That is a good one. So right. I find some tropical houseplant. Yes, that is so true. They need even more babying. I had a huge monstera outside on the landing of my home in Kenya. It was massive. It was growing up into the tree. I don't remember what kind of a tree it was. I know it wasn't a palm tree, but it was growing up, and the leaves were so big. I mean, and it was just going all over the place. Now, this one was just out in the garden doing its thing and growing roots like, you know, Tarzan could be swinging through them. So that plant was obviously in its happy place. Bring that to our environment and you're going to have a really hard time growing it. And the same with orchids. I find they're not hard to grow. It's up to us to do our research. And yes, we can still get it wrong. I have bitten off more than I could chew when it came to my vandas, and then certain mistakes were made. That is normal, but that doesn't make orchids hard to grow. I mean, I mentioned that in another live once as well. You know, the people that have cold growing environments, they will do fabulously, for example, with some of the zygopetalums out there, and even some more cold tolerant slipper orchids, neos, etc., etc. Whereas, and Rinco stylus, my nemesis, which I would love to grow as well, Rinco stylus. But yeah, so I don't believe orchids are hard to grow. I think we need to be more aware, self-aware of what our capabilities are, and accept the fact that times change, circumstances change, and notice how our collection evolves under those changes. Even if we have less time, we will understand that some orchids can handle what we can provide and some orchids can't. And then we can focus on the kinds that do well given the circumstances that we have and get more of those, or along those lines, if that makes sense. All right, another one I always hear out there is orchids hate drafts. Okay, this is where I say, this is what I mentioned before, that myths can evolve. They evolve based on how often has it been repeated? Has the word now become something synonymous with what it actually means? Have we overgeneralized something and put that word into something and everybody is supposed to understand what we mean? Because I find that this to be a general statement, and you'll probably see throughout the whole stream with the information that we are not exactly in a hobby that has a general rule of thumb that works across the board. So orchids hate drafts, but here's the thing. In my opinion, this is another myth, because the answer to this is no, they don't hate drafts as such. We need to qualify statements like these. Orchids love moving air and good circulation, but not over a heating device or in the line of fire of such a device or an air conditioning vent. So you see, we can, this orchid hates drafts. I say it as well because it is a global understanding of a circumstance when somebody says, I got bud blast, like myself. I had bud blast with some of my phalaenopsis. I had a bud blast here with my Sunya green. And that is because I said the word drafts. However, when I opened the terrace door, the first thing that moves in is a bank of cooler air. It is good circulation, but if you're talking about an air conditioning vent or something, the air was too direct because I'm not using fans. So we have to qualify certain statements before we just accept them for what they are. And when I talk about drafts, I always think of my grandfather, because to determine a draft, I always remember him saying, my neck is getting cold, I'm getting stiff, there's a draft somewhere, meaning somebody had left a door ajar and the air was pulling from one room to the other. I don't know if that, but in order for me to gauge and understand if there is a draft, I think of him and I try to see if the circumstances match what's happening and where I'm at. And that is the only way, because I don't use heating or air conditioning either. So this pulling of air from one space to the next, if that comes into direct line of fire, that is then a draft or like a heating or air conditioning vent. You're also right, Sandy, they're not hard to grow. They're more difficult to get them to flower. Absolutely, yes. And that is one statement for now that I'm holding also true in my mind, because everybody is saying that the Dowiana is super finicky, very, very fussy. And up until now, I would have to dispute that. If we're going to talk about orchid myths, up until now, I'm going to say that's a myth. Mine is growing great. If I hadn't singed the leaves this year, she'd look fantastic. But I mentioned this to Michael McCarthy a couple of weeks ago. I will only be able to determine that if I see that she should now be blooming size and she is not blooming. Then I will be able to understand what people mean that Dowiana are finicky. Because here we have another global statement. It is so general. Cattleya Dowianas are finicky. Why? What is finicky? What is it about them? For example, I don't find them finicky because they should be in a wet-dry cycle. I'm sorry, I can debunk that. Mine is growing well in semi-hydro and has been for years. Actually, from as almost out of seedling juvenile stage, I think she's near blooming size. So we can debunk the fact that, they're finicky in my books. Now, the finicky part we can probably determine once the flowering stage begins and whether to get them to flower or not, like my mailman. And that's a good thing, having fans that are moving the air, exactly, not just blasting in one direction full on without the orchids having anywhere to go and they're just getting that air. The gentle movement of the leaves, that is circulation. So that's not a draft. You're keeping the air moving. When I opened my terrace door, and honestly, I thought my Sunya Green was far enough away because she was next to my Happy Holiday that bloomed out beautifully. And Sunya Green was tucked away a little bit further behind, a little bit more towards the wall. And I thought she'd also be protected, but nope, no way. Didn't like the move at all. Anyway, so excuse whatever noise you're hearing under my feet. The two of them are having a little bit of issue who gets which foot. I'm sorry. Okay, orchids require warm temperature all year round. Hey, Ruby, hey. So good to have you. Bienvenido a España. Well, almost close enough. What you see on a loop here is my Trias disciflora first bloom. She smells like spring, like freshly cut grass. Very, very faint, but it is a pleasant, fresh fragrance. Nothing wrong with that fragrance at all. So here's the thing. Require warm temperatures all year round. Now, to be honest with you, I wasn't thinking about this being a myth at all. I would just say that would fit in with what we touched upon earlier, only being able to grow in the tropical climates. But, this is so, we have to be careful what we say out there. And it's not fair that when we talk, I consider myself experienced. I consider everybody in the room here tonight experienced, and I consider people that watch on replay, 80% of them are experienced. If you've been growing phalaenopsis orchids for the past 2 years, you are not a beginner in my books. If it's your first time with a cattleya, maybe you're a beginner, but with cattleyas. But here's the thing, when people do this and when they say this, once again, I am so disheartened and discouraged, because people will say, like, Sandy, I live in Canada and it gets cold here. Well, you can bring your orchids inside. And it always feels a little bit, I don't want to be presumptuous or anything, but, with the orchid hobby, in my opinion, we need to apply a lot of common sense. Usually the orchids that we are growing, if we are cold, they will be cold. Unless you have yourselves, some specialized orchids and you have a specific area in a greenhouse that is closed off to keep them even cooler. I wouldn't know. But, normally we are talking about orchids that would prefer to not go lower than 68 degrees Celsius, even if they are temperature tolerant. But if we want to do them 100% justice, and then you could say, yeah, they require warm temperature all year round. But it is not a global statement that I believe we should put out there as a fact. Mary Faye, this is amazing. It's good to have you. Thank you so, so much for being here. That's awesome. So, I don't believe that. We know that orchid species, Neophonetia falcata, hello, poor little thing is outside there freezing her cojones off, whereas, hopefully the next 4 that I'm trying to grow to size and get them a little bit more secured, they will also be moving outside. Thank you very much. I couldn't ever understand how orchids can grow in cold temperatures, but I've had 20 years of getting used to it, but my mind is still blown. All right, another one is that I've seen out and about that frustrate people a lot, and they have they'd have no ambition of growing orchids, is because they say orchids only flower every 3 to 5 years. Okay, now, while that is true in some cases, the majority of orchids on the market today that we can get have been bred to be vigorous, lots of blooms, continuous growers, and they will bloom maybe twice a year if you've got the right climate, especially in the tropics. And some, like my Sologeny Lime Bay, has been in bloom for the past 18 months continuously. Yes, only 1 spike, but I've got another growth coming, so we will be in 2 spike territory very, very soon if I don't get a draft. No, if I don't get her too cold, let's put it that way. But yeah, so this is something that irks me, because this is another statement that I have orchids in my collection that I have not seen bloom and I'm growing to size. So it could be 6 years before I see a bloom. It could be 35, like my Dimorphorchis lowii, before I see a bloom. But the majority of orchids that we actually grow, they don't bloom every 3 to 5 years. You buy yourself a mature orchid and she will probably come and bloom, and then in 8 months she will bloom again. These hybrids are bred for our pleasure, for their vigorous blooming cycle. So this is something that irritates me, to put out a statement like that. And while slipper orchids are such slow growers, they have gorgeous leaves. Yes, they keep us entertained while we wait for another fan to mature and then bloom. Some slipper orchids have a cycle of every 2 years. So it takes 2 years for a growth to mature before it blooms. And if you have a very young plant that only throws out 1 fan per year, you're going to be hard pressed to enjoy that species unless you're a very patient person, like my Australian friends with their seedlings. I keep repeating that because they have my utmost respect. But yeah, so slipper orchids, if you have a mature one, it may be the kind of species, or unless it's a hybrid that has been pulled in, has had a species pulled in, it'll only bloom every 2 years. Make a mistake with that one and you can set it back and you'll get a bloom every 4 years. But those are such specialized orchids. I mean, if you're going to buy one of those, you will know what you're up against. It's not right to put out a myth like that, because people will just turn away and just not get bothered with this hobby. And you can see that I am passionate about getting people to actually enjoy the hobby, because my goodness, house plants, I don't know. I used to have a lot of them, but they don't give me that same feeling of enthusiasm. I used to walk past my houseplants, water them, check their self-watering container, everything's fine, clean their leaves, move on. Orchids, I mean, and that was maybe once or twice, once a week, twice a month, depending. Orchids, I'll do a walkabout 3-4 times a day. I know, I'm not the only one. Anyway, so another thing that also I find off-putting, and I consider it a myth, and I'm sure that you will agree with me, is that orchids need 100% humidity to bloom. And if that were the truth, you wouldn't have a blooming alley, you wouldn't have an indoor blooming alley, you wouldn't have a Victoria Regina blooming right now. I never get to 100% humidity. And I don't know how these statements evolve to the point that they're put out as such a blanket statement that people would tend to believe it. Because imagine 100% humidity. The walls would be dripping. I would love it. But if you don't have the heat, I would hate it. So while they require a lot of humidity, this statement irritates me to no end, because people will walk away. They say, well, I don't have a greenhouse, and we'll get to that part as well, but then I'm not going to touch orchids. So I mean, if you can get a relative humidity of 50%, that is normally sufficient depending on your airflow. We touched upon that with temperature and humidity in a previous live. 60 to 70 is ideal. But on the other hand, I'm in a climate and I have 30% humidity on average. And that is during the growing season. And my orchids are blooming. My bud blast, that is on me. That is a culture thing, more calcium, XYZ, but it has nothing to do with 100% humidity. I have seen some Canadian native slipper orchids and, oh, yes, absolutely beautiful. I've been going from Canada to Australia. I've been torn just to look at some beautiful blooms with the vibrant colors. Sandy has cool growing dendrobiums that bloomed when you got them, but now you don't know how I can get the temperature down enough to bloom them again. Oh, that would depend on what kind of dendrobiums. And if you have a room that stays colder than the rest of your house, or if in future your greenhouse, a little corner can be sectioned off where it doesn't warm up. That would be an option as well. If you, like in the greenhouse in future, you can put them down lower so that they're not up where the heat is, like, hot air rises. The higher part of the greenhouse will be warmer, the ground area not so much. So I just had somebody ask me about torvense, Dendrobium torvense. And those are black hair orchids. They also need a little bit of specialized things. So I don't know which dendrobiums you're talking about, Sandy, but if you want to have me to have a look, maybe you can shoot me an email anytime. All right, so forget that myth. That one's debunked. I've held up hibiki, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. We all need a hibiki in our life. It goes without saying. Ugh. Orchid blooms are sensitive to being touched. Anyone? I'm a very tactile person. I don't know about you, but I can tell you that I touch my orchid blooms every single time. Now, here's another, let's say, this comment, I'm not going to debunk it as such. We have to be careful. Now, look, if I were to, what is touch? Groveling at them with your hands? Touching a petal, a sepal, or the lip with your nose? Is that touch as well? What, is the bloom just going to wilt? No. So in a way, this is a statement that has evolved from what is actually true. All right. So you can't just say they're sensitive to being touched. I mean, if I took my orchid to a show and everybody was touching and faffing over their blooms, I would be a little bit annoyed, to be honest with you. That's my bloom. Only I get to touch her, or if you ask permission. So, Nobilis, yes, And Chris, son, that's right. Move them into the garage. It's a pain, but if you have in the garage, for example, you could leave them there. Just make sure they get ample light and that your garage does not drop to freezing. That is all. Those noblies just need a chill. They don't need to freeze. And you don't have to move them in and out. If you can put a nice light bulb on them during the day for about 10 hours, they're going to love it. And you can keep them in the garage for the time being. Yes, and that is true. If you disturb the pollen area, the flower will wilt sooner. Not necessarily as quickly as if it were pollinated, especially my Masai Red, Colmonara Masai Red. So annoying because her pollinia is so sensitive and she looks gorgeous. I wish the spikes would hold that rich red color and then all the white pollinia dots would go down the row. One breeze and they just pop off. Yes, Blaze, you need a hibiki in your life. Trust and believe. Trust and believe. It's a movement. I promise you, no regrets. So, this blanket statement, in my opinion, is something that has evolved from. If you've got lotion on your hands, if you've got some kind of, let's just say you've been using insecticide and your hands are wet. If you have something and you brush the bloom up against something from your hand that is not quite the substance it should be, like rain won't affect a bloom. We know about botrytis. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the essential oils on your hands. We all know that if we were to be right and do everything 100% correct, we should never address and touch any orchids without having clean hands, period. I am not that kind of a grower. I do not wash my hands between every orchid. And yeah, my bad, but I don't do that. I don't even advise it. I don't think it's even realistic. Orchid blooms are sensitive to being touched in the form of what is on your hands. I mess around with garlic alcohol and it could be I've got garlic alcohol on a finger, I touch a bloom and that will cause a blemish. They don't mind being touched. It's just about what have you got on your hands that could be a detriment to the bloom and the structure of the bloom. Arlene, hey! It's good to see you, Arlene. Thank you so much. I'm happy that you're here too. That is awesome. Okay, chrysotoxum. You need that needs to be nice and cool. Sandy, that orchid can go out into the garage. The delicatum can go out into and light. Although these are drier throughout the winter, they need a lot of light. Oh, at least 6 to 8 weeks, at least. But do not forget the light influence that these orchids need while they are in this stage of getting a cool down. It doesn't mean they need a dark rest. They need a dark drier period. They need a dark cold period. They need light. And otherwise you can do everything, cartwheels around the patio and all that stuff. They will not bloom. If they can really take a real pounding of light. Now, I'm not saying light and heat. The cool down keeps the leaves from burning. It's about light and cool. 6 to 8 weeks is normally the time span that the hormones of an orchid mobilize to do what they're supposed to do given the needs that the orchid has in order to bloom. After a 6 to 8 week time frame, the hormones are active and are already. No, absolutely not. Please, that's what I meant in my video, Chris son. If you want to talk with somebody inside the chat room, also write out their name in full and it will highlight and draw that person's attention because their name will pop up in orange. I won't have that happening unless you tag me and write my name out. So if you have a direct question to somebody, not at all. This is what it's about. This whole thing is interactive, not just me and you. but you and you, and then one day your voice and everyone in you, if that makes sense, okay? I just don't want anybody to feel like I'm ignoring them as I'm going through this. That is all. So blooms being touched, touch away, just make sure what you've got on your hands. And if there is a little bit of a blemish left behind, that could be a little drop of water and then a beam of sun. That could be some kind of, let's say, insecticide or anything else that was on your hands. Touch away, especially sniff away if they smell gorgeous, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Here's something else when we talk about orchids. It's this is a subject that one day I will address in a live. I'm just hoping then that I won't be talking in circles. And oh yeah, me too, Lucy. Absolutely, me too. This one's gonna be, I'll try and stay on track here. Orchids won't survive if the water is too alkaline. Anybody watching this on replay, I want to make sure that I express this very, very clearly, and know that there are comments available underneath the video if you have any comments with what I'm about to say, especially if you are new to growing orchids, because what I'm about to say is going to sound a little contradictory to what most of my videos say. That's a great idea, Blaze. Move them outside. Sorry, I was reading silently. I have to stop doing that because that's dead air. I'm sorry. I might move them outside. Some days it isn't too cold. Perfect. Done. That works. Orchids won't survive if the water is too alkaline. Right. That is not true. Even though we have a pH range that we talk about with regards to nutrient absorption, this is not true. You have many species of orchids that grow wild on limestone cliffs. Some phalaenopsis, vandas, phragmipediums, and paphiopedilums, and even rapiculus lalias, where the pH of rainwater is constantly being buffered up to create alkaline conditions at the root zone. And if you have orchids that do better with a higher pH, that means they are lithophytic and terrestrial species native to Malaysia, where there is a limestone region, which are the islands of Sumatra, Java, Sulawesi, and Borneo. Now, this is not to say that anybody rushes off, checks their orchids, and ups their pH. No, please stop. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just going to debunk this myth that orchids won't survive if the water is too alkaline, because there are some species that won't do well if your pH is always 5.8, and it is not enough to have the pH at 6.5. That is why in my videos I always say up to 7. Because I don't know who's listening and I don't know what orchids everyone is growing, and I make sure to buffer that and bring in the higher pH just in case, like with the case of my rapiculus lalias, the media isn't exactly what they would have out in nature. And I probably would have a problem with even growing in limestone, and that's why I wanted Dendrobium speciosum for that corner, because I want to see what it would do on a big chunk of limestone. So please do not go rushing off and going up with your pH. That is not what this is about. But it's not right to put out a statement of saying orchids won't survive if the water is too alkaline. That is not true. On the contrary, there are some orchids out there, and boy, if you have that in a cross, in a hybrid, you are going to need to know if that is a lithophytic orchid, and maybe your orchid needs more calcium, and maybe that's why you get bud blast. Trust me, I've been down the rabbit hole with my mailman. Still trying to figure it out. So make sure that you do not get put off by this, and do not think that 5.8 is always the sweet spot, because no. If you get something that's super, super specific, super special, let's say a Phragmipedium bessiae, Kovacii, Schlimii, to name a few, Borsovicianum, Phalaenopsis maculata, modesta, fimbriata, corningiana, pulcherrima. I am now getting a little bit into the species that we consider summer fowls. Those are Phalaenopsis that, they like it a little bit higher. And these are things that I have to remind myself as well when it comes to some of my summer blooming fowls. And having reaffirmed the notes that I took quite a few years ago, trust me, when it's time to be pumping in more calcium into my summer fowls, I am going to do that across the board. I put CalMag leading up to the winter into my summer blooming Phalaenopsis like there was no tomorrow, pretty much ignoring fertilizer. And I've seen better results, especially on the magnesium side, because my leaves were getting blotchy from last winter. But you see, Phalaenopsis here, pulcherrima, now has nothing to do with pulchra, but if people were to confuse that, you just need to know that a corningiana, and I have a corningiana hybrid that is not doing well, and it is possible, A, it's a hot grower, and hello, but B, it is possible I have never given it enough calcium in the form of a higher pH where it could get at it. Just a thought. We've got Paphiopedilums as well, a very popular Paphiopedilum that we grow a lot, Belatulum, Lowii, and many Chinese, let's say, these are mainly Chinese, but mostly Chinese Paph species want a higher pH. Okay, there are some, remember we're talking about alkaline. I know, I'm just going to put this in as a disclaimer. There are some that want a real drop in pH. I mean, seriously, all the way down to 4. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about alkaline. When it comes to Rapiculus lalias, my passion, we've got Brade. I've got all of them. Brade, Briageri, Lucasiana, Dadida, Millery. Higher pH. So Vanda suavis tricolor, singled out on a list that likes a higher pH because of where it would grow out in nature. Ludicia discolor, who'd have thought? And other jewel orchids from the Chinese regions, they like a higher pH. And even though they could be grown semi-terrestrial, now we know that the soil mainly if we use soil and mix up some kind of a mix for our jewel orchids, it's always at a lower pH. And then Ludicia discolor has some issues, or any kind of jewel orchids in for that matter. So remember that, depending on what you're talking about, the pH range isn't limited to 5.5 to 6.5. All right. We are not going to hurt our orchids if we go higher. Absolutely not. In some cases, up to 8. Now, I'm not going to throw that information out there, but it is there. In some cases, some orchids would like to go all the way up to 8 pH, because that is what they get where they come from. So I know that was long-winded, but I needed to be very careful because the subject of pH is always a little bit like, I don't want to send off any alarm bells, but that is why my information on my videos goes out at 5.8, which is the sweet spot for many nutrients, all the way up to 7. And that way I can work with all kinds of media and give the right advice. Okay, another one, I'm so glad I'm going to tell you right off the bat. Another one that I'm so happy is a myth is that orchids only thrive in greenhouses. Let that sink in while I take a sip of water. Sorry about that. Can you imagine how many of us could not grow orchids because we don't have greenhouses? Now, it is very, very clear that some orchids are indeed difficult to grow outside of a greenhouse, but we know that there are thousands of varieties that are perfectly suited to indoor growing. So thank goodness the advent of artificial lighting has done so much to help us in the cultivation of orchids indoors. Thank goodness. Now we can't be using misters and all that fun stuff indoors, depending. Yeah, there you go. But depending, we can probably, throw on the misters, but maybe if you have a big bathroom, that's a fun space to grow cloud forest orchids in a bathroom. But yeah, so if you don't have a greenhouse and you see this statement anywhere, I should have a buzzer button, depending on the degree of why are you telling people this, I don't know who I'm going to get in trouble with. They probably will never see my video, but anyway. And if they do one day, I'm standing to what I'm saying. I'll be right here and defending everything. All right. Many years ago, I believed this was true, that orchids are parasitic. I honestly and truly believed that this was true. And I remember saying to my daughter when she was little, I said, can you believe that this beautiful plant actually destroys the plant that it's living on because it feeds off of it? I suppose that's not a good way to introduce a beautiful plant to a child, is it? Meanwhile, I always talk to my children as if they were adults. But talk about freaking kids out. Anyway, so that is, of course, but I had to put that in because I truly and honestly believe that. I can't say where it started. I can't say where that came in. And I thought, well, maybe if I thought that way back when I was in Kenya, it was only, let's say, recently in my life, because I'm old. It was only in the last 20 years when I got my second collection that I realized they weren't an actual fact parasitic. And I was like, oh, oops. So with a little bit of, pointing fingers at myself, I put that in my list for tonight because, they're not. They're absolutely not parasitic. And if you find an orchid that has established itself right on a branch or something and it's gotten big, the branch has broken and it's fallen to the ground, that is not the orchid's fault. That could be weather conditions. The branch was old. Maybe the orchid got too heavy. Animal influences, a woodpecker. Anyway, you get my point. So having an orchid on the ground, not because it killed the branch that it was living on. Right. We were speaking of blooms. All orchids have beautiful flowers. Now, how can you get a store-bought phal to rebloom? Sandy, patience. Patience. If it's taking time to rebloom a store-bought phal, that is because it's probably under a tremendous amount of stress. I mean, tremendous. By the time it got to your home, it's already stalling, giving all its energy to the blooms that you liked, and that's why you brought it home. And yeah, beyond that, it has probably stopped growing any roots it was thinking of growing, and it's going to take maybe, and if this is what I'm thinking and you're not getting a store-bought phal to rebloom, and maybe it is in the process of acclimating, which usually takes a full year for an orchid to get its bearings. It can take up to a year and a half before it actually responds to where it's at and then starts to show some form of root growth or something like that. Based on that, given the right climate and conditions that it's growing, finally, it needs to grow 2 leaves before a new spike can form. And on top of that, it also needs a cool down. It needs, like phalaenopsis, the complex hybrids, they need like 4 to 6 weeks. They don't have to be like up to 8 weeks, but it does need a cool down, not a chill. 10 degrees margin or 19 degrees Fahrenheit margin, not 19 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. So if, for example, my phalaenopsis grow in 30 degrees Celsius, or no, let me go to somewhere where, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? minus 19 degrees Fahrenheit, that would be the cool down for a store-bought phalaenopsis in order for it to be rebloom 4 to 6 weeks at least. Keep the light levels the same, don't change anything. In Celsius, I would need to drop my temperature down to at least 20 degrees Celsius to get it to rebloom. Okay, so then let's say all orchids have beautiful blooms. Okay. Yes and no. That's my opinion. Don't know what you guys think about that. We buy orchids specifically for some of the blooms that we've seen, or for the fragrance that we've heard about or experienced ourselves, if we are so lucky to visit a nursery. But I have seen some orchids that are pretty ugly. I know, I'm sorry, but it's true. And then you have to think, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Somebody else thinks something is beautiful and you're like going, yeah, no, thank you, not for me. That's not, doesn't speak to me. But when you look then a little bit closer in the intricacies, etc., I guess every orchid bloom is beautiful, but not right out of the gate, in my opinion. Some blooms are just downright bizarre. Dare I say ugly? But some blooms are just out of the world insane, and I suppose on top of that, with a foul fragrance to match, I can't state that as being a fact. We can admire the structure, we can admire how the evolution has dealt with pollinating. The uniqueness, yes, Roby, that it certainly is interesting and, yeah, draws attention, but to say that all orchids have beautiful flowers, no. That is my opinion. I'm like, yeah, no, I'll be over here while you enjoy it, you know? But thank goodness there's so much diversity. Desiree Grace in the house. Hey, it's good to see you. Big hugs for Desiree Grace. Big hugs. Thank you, Desiree, for being here. So let me just see. I just went to, oh yes, thank goodness there is so much diversity. Fish and Tank Tactics. Hi, good to see you. I hope everybody has had their dinner, that everybody was snapping away at their pellets and doing well. I know, yeah, it's so true, Roby. And on top of that, look, the diversity is, I'm glad everybody has a different taste, because some people grow orchids that I'm like, I would have never thought of that, or I've never seen something like that. It builds my curiosity and it opens the doors for another rabbit hole. But so, just my opinion. So good to have you here, Desiree and Fish on Tactics. Right, another thing we have here. Okay, don't hate me. Don't hate me. Orchid needs, sorry, let's try that again. Orchids need lots of water to grow. How can you put a statement out like that when the majority of growers grow in a wet-dry cycle? There you go. Congratulations, Fish and Tactics. I'm excited. My orchids are blooming again. Being winter, it looks nice. Absolutely. This is the beauty of this hobby. You see, where these orchids are in actual fact naturally distributed, it is summer. It is summer, you guys. So we have what they would do out in nature in their summer happening in our winters. I just can't. Love them. I'm so happy you've got them to bloom again. I bet you're over the moon. So, orchid needs lots of water. Yeah, well, how can you say that on one hand and then everybody is harping on about wet-dry cycle? Now, I would say that is true because of my setup. My orchids need a lot of water, seeing as it's a self-watering setup. So, yeah, this is a myth, in my opinion, because it's not about the water per se. It's about the season, the active growth, and everything that the orchid is doing. To put out a blanket statement like that, I just think is erroneous. and very, very dangerous because, as we know, actually excessive watering can lead to rotting and decay. And then I have another little thing, especially true for the epiphytic orchids because they survive in drought-like conditions in nature. And that's where that goes out the window because, yes, orchids can survive in drought-like conditions, but based on our setup, we have to be super, super careful what we consider drought. So, as mentioned in another stream, seeing a structure shrivel is already too much drought. Why let it come to that? A little trickle of water here and there, quarter of a cup, half a cup, full cup, depending on the size of the pot. 10 days every 2 weeks, depending on the humidity in the air. Orchids need a lot of water. We have to add on to statements like this, and that is why that is why probably a lot of people fail. They see something like this thrown out into the interwebs and then water and water and water, and they see shriveling leaves and then they water and water. It's all going horribly wrong in the pot. So yeah, I'm hoping that this live stream, if not just this segment, gets sent out with a timestamp because it's so sad to see something like this written out there. And when I use self-watering, the velamen gets a characteristic that is adapted to a setup, not vice versa. You see, Desiree, that is so true because orchids thrive on neglect. I would say that the less I do with my orchids, the happier they are. During this orchid shuffle period with bringing them in and out for them to enjoy some sunshine, I'm constantly freaking out. I'm going to make a mistake and then this breaks, that breaks, I don't know what, gosh, don't drop a pot type thing. But yeah, leave them alone. Not extensively, of course, but leaving them alone is the best thing. Sometimes I've even had the hands behind my back, leaning forward to look at my orchids, leaning forward with my hands tucked behind my back because I'm touchy, feely. And then what happens now with a sweater on, that sweater gets caught on something, I move away and boom, the whole thing comes my way. I'm surrounded by danger. I need like a cage around me. But yeah, hands behind my back and then I look. 360-degree peripheral vision is what we need. Oh dear. Oh, my bulbos flowered for the first time this year. Yes, Arlene, high five. That is awesome. That makes me happy, especially if you have bulbos with long spikes because, oh my goodness, always this long spikes thing. I've got some tolumnias with long spikes at the moment, and when I was just talking about the sweater thing, I'm like, oh, I should move them, and then I haven't moved them. Tomorrow I'm going to move them because I do want them to bloom. But yeah, my phalaenopsis are nicely out of reach where I can't bash against them and snap spikes and all of that. So anyway, the trick with regards to the water, if there is the trick, is to keep the orchid roots moist with a certain dry periods in between, if that is your growing setup, if that is what you do. And with all that being said, maybe we should just move on because that is such a terrible statement to put out there. That orchid is growing in akadama and grit, terrarium, like, some kind of terrarium or aquarium grit, and it is a semi-hydro pot. Fantastic. So happy that worked out. Okay, are you still with me? Shall we go on? I have a few more. Let me know because I don't want to keep your time too much. I appreciate that you're here on a Friday. Even the replay people who are here, I want to just make sure that I always remember, if somebody watches on replay, you are so appreciated as well. Thank you for still being here. Now, I do have a few more. I don't mind going on. I've got time today. Hakuna Matata here. Let me just count and get your opinions. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more to go. I don't know. Shall I continue? Just a question. Put a 1 in the chat while I have another sip of water. If you put a 1 in the chat for continue, put a 2 in it. That is good enough for me. That's good enough for me. Awesome. Thank you so much for that feedback. Thank you, Fernando. I'm so glad. Happy days. Because, moving on, orchids have to be grown in clear pots only because their roots need to photosynthesize for the orchid to grow well. That was a mouthful. Orchids have to be grown in clear pots only. And then add a reason to that. And that makes it such a clear statement as if it were a fact. And you know my setup, that is not true. And besides that, the orchid will grow well even if you don't have it in a clear pot, because it's not about the roots needing to photosynthesize. While they can and will if exposed to light, it is so minute and minuscule that an orchid with foliage is going to photosynthesize through the leaves. It doesn't need the little percentage of photosynthesis that the roots would do should they be in a clear pot. On top of that, how many people are moaning about algae in their pots when they grow in clear pots and then they shove the clear pot into a mask? No, peoples, grow your orchids in any color pot that you prefer, that you enjoy, because this is garbage, in my opinion. Nope. And let me just put it this way. There are some orchids that do not like to have light around their roots, and those are semi-terrestrials or terrestrial orchids, but that makes sense. Unless you're in some kind of scientific experiment where you want to see the active root growth of a terrestrial orchid, they belong in the ground. If you can't put them in the ground, they belong in a pot, and there is no light, including slipper orchids. Most of them don't like to have that much light around their roots. That is why if you want to check the roots on your slipper orchids and the progress, you can grow them in clear pots, but boy oh boy, there is some darkness in that sleeve or that mask that you put that pot in. So this is garbage, because the photosynthesis, for example, I've seen this a lot. Orchid roots photosynthesize. Yes, they do. But that doesn't mean they're going to fail when they don't photosynthesize, because look, you're going to grow an orchid in a clear pot. What about the center of the pot? It doesn't mean that there's no roots in the center of the pot. It's just the orchid roots stay yellow or they stay white because, you know, the chlorophyll is not getting any sun. And then what about, I just had a thought, I went off on a tangent, coming right back through circle. What about the roots? Let me requalify that. Now we think of orchids where that do not have leaves. That is fundamental, that those roots have light all the time, as much as possible, in an environment that is conducive to that orchid, because a leafless orchid clearly has nothing to photosynthesize. Maybe a teeny tiny structure comes out that was a leaf once upon a time before it evolved, but it is meaningless and it quickly falls off. Some phalaenopsis orchid species are deciduous. It is paramount that those orchids are never grown in pots, and that is why a lot of the time you see them mounted. Chylocystas come to mind, the ghost orchid comes to mind, and then there is one species, a little phalaenopsis miniature. I lost her. I lost mine. I had her bloom and I lost mine. But anyway, so if you have an orchid, terracotta, yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Lots of aeration. Fantastic. Nice and cool, which some orchid roots enjoy, especially during the warmer summer months. Works really well around orchid roots. Awesome. So make sure that if you want to get away from clear pots, the algae, if you're going to put a pot into a mask anyway, get a pot that is already pretty, that you like to look at and makes your orchid shine, because they don't need to be in any way, shape, or form in clear pots, because the roots photosynthesize. The margins are tiny. Again, deciduous orchids, not the dendrobium kind of deciduous orchids, because they've got leaves all summer to feed off of and photosynthesize. I'm talking deciduous little phalaenopsis, the ghost orchid, anything that doesn't have leaf structure, never ever put those in pots. They depend on the photosynthesis through the roots. The rest, nope. Okay, next one. A favorite topic of mine. I've seen this one a lot. I should have taken some pictures. I completely forgot. That's a shame. I should have taken some pictures, but maybe my words will explain enough. Anthocyanin is only a result of too much light. I've read that over and over again, and that's why I thought I would include it in this list. Anthocyanin is only a result of too much light, and I could just go, no, objection, misleading or leading the witness. Okay. Whereas our orchids do produce a lot of that red pigmentation when they have too much light or sufficient light, not even too much. You see these global statements, they are so exaggerated. Sufficient light will produce anthocyanin, and it is something that we look for, and then it gives us confirmation that our orchid is getting enough light, should our orchid have it in her to produce anthocyanin, because not all orchids do. Now, anthocyanin is also a result of too cold temperatures, because same with too much light, anthocyanin is like our sunburn. Now, if we don't pay attention to our sunburn and we stay out and continue going into the sun, it's going to get dangerous for us. So we either put on some protection or we get out of the bright light, and then we can, let our skin relax. It's the same thing for anthocyanin. A sunburn is a warning sign for us humans that we need to back off a little bit, and the same with anthocyanin. Now, while an orchid in bright shade is not going to burn to a crisp and not get sunburn on the leaves, the anthocyanin will always be present, and the orchid is getting plenty of light to bloom. However, the anthocyanin also is a signal of stress, specifically if it gets too cold. And that is something that only your specific environment is going to be able to determine. And I'm cross with myself. I should have brought these pictures. But anthocyanin, because of cold damage, wait. Let me qualify that. Anthocyanin, because of too cold temperatures, will only manifest itself on the new growth areas, as in the crown, or a new growth pseudobulb coming out at the base that doesn't have anthocyanin on other occasions. But if you think of a vanda and you think of the top and you have all the growing points, that is where anthocyanin will show if the temperatures get too low, because the cells are still very, very tender. If the rest of the orchid is not showing any anthocyanin whatsoever, the lower structures, the more mature structures, including the fact that she's been blasted with light, then that is nothing to do with too much light. That is a signal to take your orchid and bring it into a warmer place if you can. My chalpraia is going to have to make do with what's happening outside. So I am only aware that, we have reached the temperatures where she is going to go, meh, I don't like this. She'll be fine, but she's not going to like it. So we've got anthocyanin, not just because of sufficient light, get away from that too much light, sufficient light. We've got anthocyanin when it gets too cold, when the temperatures drop, only on new structures, immature baby tender structures. Hey, Amina, good to see you. Welcome. So nice to see you. So sorry about the other night. I did not see your name until the end. So sorry. And then an orchid will also show anthocyanin if she has too little magnesium, which can go hand in hand with too cold. So anthocyanin is generated, is a protective mechanism, not just pretty for our eyes, but not just pretty on root tips, but it signals enough light to bloom. It signals it's too cold only if it appears on tender structures and the rest of the orchid is not showing anthocyanin, only then. And it signals a lack of magnesium, which is very easily corrected with some calcium and magnesium as a supplement. 2 to maybe 4 weeks and the problem is resolved. That is one of the reasons I've been pumping. Oh, you're okay. Don't worry about it, Amina. That is why I don't do small devices. This autocorrect always thinks it's smarter than me, and I hit send because I trust it and I get in trouble very, very quickly. But don't worry, that's fine. So yeah, that's why before the winter, given the circumstances I'm dealing with, my orchids were pumped full of calcium and magnesium. I could have done more Epsom salt soaks, but because I have such a broad spectrum of orchids to deal with, I just threw in CalMag. That'll be fine. So that is anthocyanin, not just a result of too much light. I wish they would stop saying that. And anyway, it's not too much light, it's sufficient. By the time you see anthocyanin when it comes to light, it means sufficient. Ugh. Anyway, moving on. I'm not ranting, I'm fine, I'm just passionate, I promise. No, it's true. You know, when I start talking like this, I'm like, nya, 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 nya. That's why I don't have a classroom, because the students would now be cowering in their chair like, oh, I'm so scared. She's getting angry. I'm not getting angry at all. Anyway, okay. Now imagine me doing this in Spanish in front of people, especially such a passionate language that Spanish is. I'll never be asked to come back. Oh dear, there you go, Blazeroni. You might want to give that a go and see what happens. It takes about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks to see if there's a correction in the color. But if it is in a location that's a little bit too cold, even think about that for a moment. Maybe it is the cold temperatures on those tender structures. Just a thought. Just a thought. I'm hoping that will help. We don't want things to get too cold and then, yeah, then especially tender structures with tender cells, that'll incur rot rather quickly when it gets cold. Okay, next point, next myth. This is a myth. Unless I hear another opinion, I'll be so, so happy. And then if I have another opinion, please tell me why. I always like to hear the why, not because I'm going to counteract it, I'm going to argue it, but because I need to understand the perspective. Okay, so I'm open to hearing every opinion with no matter what I say. The next one is do not fertilize an orchid after repotting, and then we'll just do a run on that one. Wait a week before fertilizing an orchid that has just been repotted. I feel like these two kind of go hand in hand. Because, you know, some people ask then, how long should I wait? And then people say a week. And I'm like, why? How does this make sense? What's the difference whether I fertilize after I repot? I mean, okay, here's the thing. Let's qualify this statement. Let's not put it through the shredder just yet. Excuse me while I clear my throat. Let's not put this through the shredder just yet. Best practice is before repotting, we give the pot a good soak because, you know, repotting, easier to remove media, the roots won't be as damaged. Well, we hope. We normally take advantage of the fact that we are soaking an orchid anyway, and we put in CalMag because it strengthens the orchid, it helps with the repotting stress, and if we add seaweed during the right season of the orchid's growth pattern, then we are also giving it another little bit of a hormone kick to push it along and reduce the stress of a repot even further. So we can say We don't have to fertilize an orchid after repotting, but we can. Why not? The reason we don't have to fertilize an orchid after repotting is because we have just soaked the orchid in supplements that will help it along for the next week, 10 days, depending on your setup. And if it's a wet-dry cycle, how quickly does the pot go dry? Possibly a week, and then afterwards you fertilize. But to say do not fertilize an orchid after repotting, why? Now, I've heard also that it is because the roots are going to be bruised, because the repotting, and you should let them dry out, because that would only apply in a wet-dry cycle. So that is a very limiting factor, in my opinion, targeted to only a single setup. And then the rest of us would sit there and go, well, I'm in semi-hydro, I'm in self-watering, I do this and I do that. I'm in water culture. What are you talking about? Let the roots heal. My roots are always wet. So we need to evolve. Again, myths come out. Maybe a wives' tale at the back in the day was true. And then it evolves into becoming a golden rule, which in the orchid hobby is so difficult. You cannot pinpoint a golden rule specifically. So this, in my opinion, now is a myth. If you're going to put the statement out like that, you would have to place the statement in such a way that it reads, you do not have to fertilize an orchid after repotting. End of story. And then it would make absolute sense. But do not fertilize or wait a week. Even if you have soaked with CalMag and seaweed and done all the fantastic things, let me tell you, a repot will always bruise roots. And if that pot only dries out in 3 or 4 days, then you're watering, those roots haven't healed. There's nothing to callus over. There will never be anything to callus over. It's an open wound. It can dry out a little bit depending on where it is located in the pot. But if it is the growing season, and usually the repots happen during the growing season, you want to fertilize. The only way an orchid is going to continue with its momentum after the stress of a repot if you keep giving it what it needs to counteract that stress. So my recommendation is, based on what your orchid is doing, do not deprive it. No matter your setup, if you are going to fertilize afterwards, fertilize. If you haven't soaked with calcium and magnesium before the repot and just plain water because you were rushed, I don't know, busy, fertilize afterwards. Give the orchid what it needs. Do not wait. It's going to make no difference to the roots. Chris Sons had some dens top leaf turning red, thought it was light. Now you're not sure. Well, warm heat rises. So depending on the location of your dendrobiums, it could be the light. If they are close to the artificial light, it cannot be the cold temperatures because warm heat rises. And then maybe it's a magnesium deficiency, but I would have to see the orchid in order to determine that. But cold would not happen to a dendrobium, seeing as, unless you're talking about a miniature that is down on the floor where it's the coldest. So I'm thinking that what you've got is because of light. Amina says, I grow in Spark. Sorry, Spark. I grow in bark and sphagnum moss with wet dry cycle and always soak orchids after repotting. Also use fertilizer at the moment in 70%. Everybody is growing. There you go. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Got you. Thank you, Amina. And I do not want to make these live streams or my channel as an echo chamber. I'm so open to everything. The only thing is I want to know why, and I want to know for how long. So if somebody does something and they haven't done it, or whatever I say, and somebody says, oh, but I don't do that, I've done it like this, and I want to know how long, because durability, length, consistency also determines results, not just the first 6 months or because it's nice and warm and everybody's growing well because it's nice and warm. You know, as far as I'm concerned, even me, I'm always into the 5th season with this collection. And, you know, that gives a little bit more of a background as to behavior patterns of each orchid based on how long it's been going on, how long have I been doing what I've been doing. So this is not to be an echo chamber, but I appreciate your comment, Amina. Thank you so much. Now, I have another one. Hydrogen peroxide is bad for orchid root systems. I need to really put it out there that I would like to add to that comment saying hydrogen peroxide is bad for orchid root systems if you don't use it and you have snails in your pot. That would make that statement a fact. To put out hydrogen peroxide is bad for your orchid root systems, you need to qualify what you are doing with your hydrogen peroxide. How much percent is it? What is the concentration? How often are you using it? And in what conditions? It is not right to put this out there and your orchid, whatever, be it new, be it old, wherever you grow, greenhouse mainly, and then you have a snail infestation and you are fighting it because you've heard this statement, whereas using hydrogen peroxide would get rid of that problem very, very quickly and you wouldn't be so upset at losing new roots all the time, every time, spikes, etc., new growths. Now, hydrogen peroxide is bad for root systems if the concentration is higher than 6%. Yep. Even 6% hydrogen peroxide is fine for orchid roots. However, I would not recommend it because by that time you would now have to qualify the size of the roots. Thin roots, medium-sized roots, thick and fleshy, chunky roots. What is the point when hydrogen peroxide 3% is perfectly fine? You can even do hydrogen peroxide 3% pot soaks if you are not ready to repot your orchid and you're seeing some mold is in there. And when I say not ready, your life is getting in the way, you're busy, your orchid's growing roots, it should be repotted, the media is breaking down, maybe your temperatures aren't right, as in my case, and plethora of reasons why you cannot repot. You can actually soak the pot in hydrogen peroxide, get rid of the fungus. I wouldn't even worry about mold. Give it a little bit of a spritz and then flush the pot through with clear water after maybe a period of 10 minutes of the hydrogen peroxide doing its thing, and it's going to be fine. It is going to be fine. Trust me, please. I know that there's people with a lot more experience than I have out there saying hydrogen peroxide is bad for orchid root systems. I would like them to qualify that, because with whatever study you present, you can present a study with a narrative that you make people believe it to be true. And I plead with you, hydrogen peroxide 3%. Don't worry about any higher concentration. But if you've got issues with snails, if you have anything, even for example, just a little bit of a mold issue, a little bit of a fungus somewhere, go for it. Once it's stopped fizzing, it is water. And then after that, you can flush the pot through for peace of mind, or you can mist or wipe the structures down. But a little bit of fungus here and there, wipe with a clear, like with a disc, use hydrogen peroxide. It's going to be fine, absolutely fine. Yes, it does. It does. Mealybugs, thrips, it does get rid of pests in the soil as well. Now, it is a cheap commodity in the United States. It is not a cheap commodity here. Thank you, Joshi, very much. I didn't know that. I appreciate that you put that comment. Even AOS, the American Orchid Society, recommends hydrogen peroxide. Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, in the United States, hydrogen peroxide 3% is a cheap commodity. It is not in Europe. So when I talk about pot soaks, probably and the people in Europe are raising their eyebrows like going, well, you're living La Vida, aren't you? And I'm like, no, I'm not living La Vida by far. And my orchids have never had a hydrogen peroxide soak, but it can be done. So, of course, when you're thinking bigger pots like fungus gnats, you know, you got all that with the little eggs and things going on. If you're thinking succulents, if you're thinking cacti, which have little mealybugs around their root systems, and if you want to do a treatment, you can soak those little pots in hydrogen peroxide 3%, 10 minutes, take them out, and it'll kill all of that. Thrips, make 100% sure, if you're going to use hydrogen peroxide, even if you're going to go with garlic alcohol, which is a zap ninja garlic alcohol, that you do it every 3 days. And I would then go with a paintbrush or a Q-tip so you target it and don't just keep blasting it all over, because too much of a good thing can be bad. As a treatment, fantastic. Make it a thing like, oh, I'm just going to use hydrogen peroxide. We may encounter issues. I'm not saying we will, but we may. We want to use it targeted in such a way that it is effective and not overdo it. Okay? So being very, very cautious with what I put out there. If you've got things like thrips, these little blighters, they come back every 3 days. If you're not right on top of them, make sure you take a paintbrush and you dip the paintbrush in and then wipe. You want to talk about my garlic alcohol? I don't drink it. But you don't want to use you don't want to spray it. You want to target it. You want to paint structures, literally, because even if you don't see a fizz on hydrogen peroxide while it's doing its thing, the components of the hydrogen peroxide will become like a repellent, the same as the garlic does in garlic alcohol. So you don't always need the fizz. It's cool to see it. You think you think that I'm actually, you think it's doing something because you can see the fizz. But if you take it and just paint the structures, if you see mealybugs on the surface, if you see thrips on the surface, you're going to do the same effect, especially on small orchids. I speak of my beautiful little Arangus Luteo alba. One of them, we're still holding on, the roots are green. The other one had thrips, and oh my goodness, I've been painting the structures with garlic alcohol every 3 days. Now I'm doing it every week. But if I were to just blast that with these products, the structures, the cuticles are so fine, so thin, so delicate. Even a mature orchid like that, it can't take the onslaught of stuff. We just have to be meticulous. Does that make sense, Blaze? Everything in moderation, including ice water. So my garlic alcohol, since I got that, oof, it's good stuff. If I would just be able to stay on top of things. I'm getting better at it now. I'm getting better. I was a bit lackadaisical. Good, Blaze. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Now, with the garlic alcohol, I don't know the measurements. I do have a video about that specifically. It also includes a fungicide, which is garlic infused water, especially for dendrobiums. This was a lifesaver for many of my dendrobiums. I have as yet to show you my Naphrix Alex Poli. I was super, super proud of it. I still am. She's in bud. She's doing fabulously, except that this time I didn't take off the sheaths because they were so pretty. My orchid was healthy. She had garlic alcohol on her. She had a small deficiency because she was growing so fast on a shelf I didn't even notice. So she had some deficiencies, and some thrips got into the sheath and started to wear away at one of the growths. So there's black striations on that growth, and it is a bit thinner at the top, at the crown, than the other one that was not affected. But yes, I wasn't going in with the garlic alcohol into the sheaths. Live and learn. Now I paint my spikes as well because, hey, Joshi, my Hawaiiara lava burst is in bloom. Yeah, and everything around that orchid is protected by garlic alcohol, but I didn't paint the little the spike, so there was some scale on the spike. Can you believe it? So anyway, there is a video out, and I will link that for even the replay crew who, if they were watching, I will link that in the description of this video. Stuff is awesome, even though some pests will get through. But that is not because the garlic alcohol doesn't work. That is like a computer programmer saying the computer is rubbish. No, your programming was rubbish. It's how you use it. You know what I mean? Just an analogy. Okay. We shall move on. When we come to root system, I have, this is the fourth, and then I have 3 more left. Water before adding fertilizer solution to the pot or the mount, as in, oh goody, I'm glad you did. She's a scrawny little one, but if I can keep this up, she's well on her way to recovery. Talking about seeds and pests, I might be getting maxillaria soon. How would pest for, this is too far. We're going to do pest prevention on one day. I am going to, just give me a moment. Give me a moment, everybody. I'm going to take a screenshot of this. Click straight away. Please forgive me, because we will do pest prevention, Blaze. Otherwise, I'm going to get off track, because this is a subject that is super duper important, even in the winter. My maxillaria has not had pests, and he's a beast. Neither has my tenuifolia, so if that gives you peace of mind that they're not exactly pest magnets, not in my case, and I've got scale and mealybugs all around me in the hedge, and cousin it lives right by the hedge. So we have some time. You're getting one. I still have time with that subject, but as peace of mind, they're not exactly, in my experience, pest magnets. Okay, so a myth that I've been hearing a lot, and I understand the reasoning behind this, and that's why I'm accepting what people say, because whatever works for you, I'm not going to shred this one, but I will talk about it, and I will say that is, please, there's no need. Water before adding fertilizer solution to the pot and mount. Now, water, what they're trying to imply with that statement is that the roots should be wet before you put any kind of fertilizer on roots, as in damp, because they say that the fertilizer will burn the roots. Yes, my question right leading up to that, if I had the guts to be confrontational, which I'm not, would be, how much fertilizer are you putting into your solution? How many parts per million for you to see root burn or velamen burning? And the next question would be, if they gave me a high number, I would say, and how high is your humidity? And how high is your airflow? Do you see where I'm getting at? Please do not wet your roots before you put fertilizer on them. The velamen works with immediate absorption. I mean, immediate. The moment you put something on dry roots, it's going to be absorbed. You put water, you see, it's like a sponge. The sponge can only hold so much water, and then if you pour anything on top of that, it's just going to pour superficially or run over the top because the sponge is full. So I would say if you're getting root burn, Sandy's Orchid says, I've had mealybugs on the phal and aphids on orchids in the house plant. Scared of putting mine on other house plants. Yeah, don't be scared. Don't be scared. Look, you've got space. You've got space to your advantage in the greenhouse. Usually when you have mealybugs and aphids on orchids and houseplants, there could be a space issue, and these guys like to migrate. They'll go here, they're a little bit bored on that plant, they'll move to the next one, then they see that one over there, and everybody needs to go check that one out, and it's like, hello, you know, in your greenhouse. Please don't be scared about that. You've got space, you've got airflow. You see, there's going to be a completely different climate. Now, yes, you will need a good treatment, and I can't give you any better, cheaper advice than garlic alcohol. I promise you. And not once has an orchid reeked of alcohol. Not once has her bloom reminded me I use garlic alcohol. It's just a little bit of an aroma in the air, just a small time frame. It evaporates so fast, but it's the essential oils of the garlic that may remain on the structures. And of course, do not mist your blooms with it. We go back to touching blooms, but bye, Joshi. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. Thank you. Adios. But, you know, we just have to be a little bit more, let's say, on top of things, but you will have more space, a different climate. Nobody will be jumping on each other's bandwagons when it comes to pests. You'll have much better control. Trust me. Do not be scared. Embrace it. Embrace it. It's going to be fine. I promise you. And the essential remnants of the garlic, they are the shield, the protection. Now, I say repeat applications even if you don't have pests every 2 months, and I need to make a point of putting an alarm into my phone for next year so that nothing happens to my orchids the way like it did with my Tolumnias this year. That's just me. I dropped the ball. It wasn't the garlic alcohol. So yeah, make sure that when you water or you fertilize your orchids, just give them, when they say less is more, it's true. We're back to too much of a good thing can be damaging. So if you're going to be fertilizing because they're in active growth, at least you know then they're getting something. You will not be burning your roots. If you think you've overdone it, flush the pot through after 10-15 minutes, because that's all it takes for roots to absorb nutrients. 10-15 minutes. How long it takes them to move the nutrients up the structure is a completely different story, but 10-15 minutes and that phalaenopsis has been absorbed. I mean, the fertilizer solution has been absorbed and you're good to go. You're good to flush, okay? If you are in doubt about if your concentration is too high, you don't want to burn your roots. But just wetting roots, even on a mount prior, no, don't do that. You may have very low humidity. You may be concerned. Then I would rather say what you should do is fertilize every single day on a mount very weakly. But if you're going to water your mount on a daily basis, put some fertilizer in there. It won't burn your roots as long as it is weak and you're still fine. If in doubt, go back after 10-15 minutes and, you know, water or mist, or with a little spray bottle, just mist around the root system if you're unsure. But don't wet your roots. Give them the food straight away. And if you don't believe what I say, I'm going to go back to what happens out in the canopies of the trees. It cannot rain for many, many weeks. All of a sudden they get an inundation of rain, and the first thing that they get hit with all the nutrients stored in the bark and the debris as the water pours over the roots. That is a high concentration of nutrients. And yes, rain continues, and then that of course dilutes the concentration of the initial nutrients. That is why you don't see root burn in nature. But the first onslaught is full-on nutrients after being dry for several days. So I hope that makes sense. That is my reasoning. Debunked. Not good, not good. Don't do that. Okay. Another one that I thought was relatively funny, because I've never actually heard this mentioned by anybody that I've asked an opinion on. Maybe in the room tonight, we will hear somebody say, yeah, getting bad vibes. Of all plants, orchids are known for carrying bad energy. Let me rephrase that. Orchids are known for carrying bad juju. And I was like, what? You could have fooled me. So I don't know who came up with that. Maybe it was somebody back in the olden days that, you know, if you go out orchid hunting back in the day, it was the wild, wild west, and indigenous people would, you know, take the lives of those people coming there that they've never seen in their life before. And those people, all they did was hunting down orchids so that they can take them back to the rich people back in Europe for them to collect and grow. So a lot of people lost their lives from these orchid excursions back in the 1800s. So maybe that is where this comes from. Orchids are known for carrying bad energy. Yeah. So I have to, interesting. I saw a talk from bulbophyllum. He says bulbophyllum take up to 30 minutes to start taking water when the roots get wet. That's interesting. Bulbophyllum can take up to 30 minutes to start taking in water when the roots get wet. 30 minutes. Wow. Okay, that's the brain scratch. I know that bulbophyllum like a lot of humidity. This because they are from an environment where the roots are always down. Well, there you go. Okay. I appreciate that, Blaze. Thank you very much. So yeah, they come from a high humidity, then they're always wet. In one of my streams, I was mentioning about the temperature and humidity, and if it's always wet, well, make sure you've got airflow. But even the humidity is water. So I wonder why he's putting it like that. I wonder, humidity, it carries water. By 100% humidity, you're standing in a shower. So I wonder why he's making that distinction of the humidity water as opposed to water being soaked up. That's a rabbit hole. Thank you, Blaze. I appreciate that comment. Thank you. So let me just say from my perspective that my orchids have the total opposite effect. I don't see them dragging me down, giving me any bad vibes, any bad juju. On the opposite, on the contrary, aside from attracting positive energy and breathing lively energy into tired spaces, it is my opinion that orchids are also said to be great mood boosters. Period. Whether they're in bloom or not. Yes, that would be awesome. If you want to, you can also, I'm going to send it to me by email, and I will post it in the link of this and in the description of this video. I was going to say post it into the comments, but we don't know how long this video is going to take to process. I don't want to waste your time. That would be awesome, Blaze, and I would be much appreciated. Thank you so much. Fabulous. We've got a bulbo expert in the house. Happy days. So yeah, anyway, positive energy. I cannot say that they've got anything juju-wise. And then we've got two more. Phalaenopsis is the easiest and most forgiving orchid for beginners. I am going to debunk that because I am an experienced grower. I have had problems with Phalaenopsis. And yes, you can always blame my setup. It needed to be figured out. I think I've got it figured out, but dang, they are not the easiest and most forgiving for beginners. Absolutely not. Because a lot of the time, a beginner doesn't understand that every Phalaenopsis is different, regardless of the fact that you got it from the same garden center that you got your other 5 from. This orchid is different from the other 5. I don't care if it's a Phalaenopsis. I find that statement is so broad and so misleading, and it's very disheartening because, if I wasn't successful with 200 other orchids while I was trying to figure out my Phalaenopsis orchids, I would have given up a long time ago. So I'm sorry. I'm going to debunk this. It is not the easiest, and it is not the most forgiving for beginner orchids. As a beginner orchid, absolutely not. My opinion. I mean, I have heard a lot of people say, "Yep, easiest orchid ever," and I'm like, you are so lucky. Mad respect, honestly. Like, I look up to you. Anyway, so my last point is I hear a lot of people saying wiping the underside of orchid leaves is a big no-no. And I'm like, you cannot let statements like that stand. What if somebody reads this and says, but I've got so much dripping happy sap, and I've got a mealybug, and I've got, scale, like in my case back in the day, I've got scale under my leaves, and I'm not supposed to, what am I going to do? My orchid's going to die. This statement like this needs to be qualified. It needs to be expanded on. it needs to read, wiping the underside of orchid leaves is a big no-no when the stomata are open. When the stomatas are closed, wipe away, clean away. Make sure that you don't do it when they're open, meaning, again, thick cuticled orchids, like thick cuticle cattleyas, thick cuticle epidendrum, coilostylis, anything thick, phalaenopsis as well. Their stomata open at dusk and stay open all night until, early sunrise, and then they close. The reason being, they need to conserve energy, and their thick structures will lose a lot of water if they open their stomata during the day. So they open them at night, wipe away, clean the underside of your orchid leaves during the day, not just before dusk, not just at dawn. Give it a couple of hours. Have your coffee, have your tea, whatever, and then wipe your leaves. The stomatas are closed, and there will be no harm done. That includes any kind of insecticide treatment, whatever. Personally, I'm not a big fan of leaf shine. If the orchid is doing well, the leaves will shine anyway. I think that leaf shine can possibly hinder in us seeing any symptoms that we need to address. Simply because the leaf shine makes a leaf look pretty, we cannot see what's going on. But that's personal preference. Now, having said that, when do we wipe thin-leaved orchids, thin cuticle orchids? Let's talk about oncidiums. Let's talk about zygopetalums, or anything along the realm of being thin cuticle. That would be at dusk, at night, or very, very, very early in the morning. Because their thin cuticles and their thin little structures, they don't lose that much water through the leaves during the day. And normally, Chris San, thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy you came. Thank you. So normally they will not lose, because they also live in a high humidity environment, ideally. Okay, so wherever they come from, whether you have that or not, makes no difference. I'm just saying, that is why they have their stomatas open during the day, because their natural environment has high humidity. And then you only wipe the underside of the leaves when it's dark, because that is when they have their stomata closed. So that qualifies this statement: wiping the underside of orchid leaves is a big no-no. Hey, Michelle Carini, big hello, jumping up and down, waving arms. Hi. So happy that you made it. Really glad that you listened in. I appreciate that so very, very much. Thank you, Michelle. So wiping the underside of leaves is a big no-no. Please, wipe the underside of the leaves. Just know, thick cuticles, do that during the day. Thin cuticles, do that during the night. And I hope that that is helpful. And I cannot believe I've been here more than 2 hours. And so have you. Some of you. I cannot believe it. Wow, I'm proud of us. Goodness me. Oh my word. Amazing. And all this time, you've been watching a bulbophyllum get tickled. You guys are amazing. Absolutely fantastic. So I've taken a screenshot for a subject that we're going to do a little bit more in depth. I'm going to wrap my head around this one. Plus, I'm still wrapping my head around. I've got notes for the Brassivola one. So nobody think that, I'm not getting around to it. But if there are any questions, please ask them right now. I'm going to take a little sip of water, so there will be a moment of dead air. But if you have any questions, ask them right now. If you want to come up and elaborate on a subject, you are more than welcome to do that. Otherwise, wow. And of course, if you have a myth of your own that you would like to address and, put under the spotlight, let me know. We've still got time. We've still got time. I have maybe 20 minutes before I turn into a pumpkin. That is why I do not stream at midnight. And I will only start a stream after midnight. Anita Brown says, brand new Cheryl, hey, how are you? Oh, it's so good to see you. This is wonderful. I'm so glad you could as well. So glad. Thank you for leaving a comment. That's awesome. Anita Brown says, what is the difference in the types of thin leaf phals versus thick wide leaf orchids? I'm not entirely sure I am understanding that question. Thin leaf phals. Thin leaf as in what phal would you consider a thin leaf? What about bleach? Is it safe? Yes, Lucy, it is safe at a ratio of 1 part bleach to 10 parts of water. It is safe. Again, in moderation. I wouldn't do it all the time, but make it 1 part. Do not think you're going to do better by putting 2 parts. Okay? 1 part is safe. And coffee over the orchid roots, Desiree? Oh boy. I have a script for a video, which I think I want to do a live on about these kinds of fertilizers. Please do not. Please do not. And I'm not just talking about the staining. Orchid roots will stain, be it during age, whatever. We don't get our, something evaporates faster, etc. Do not do anything that is organic when it comes to coffee or tea ground, like the leaves of tea. You are going to bring in all the lovely little cretins that enjoy these kind of organic components, and that will bring mold, that'll bring fungi. No. And on top of that, what is the pH? What are these kinds of tips that we hear all over? What is the pH? How can the orchid benefit? What is the concentration? Very, very careful. I would just put a big on that one. Absolutely not. No, you haven't missed too much. I don't know when you came in, Desiree, brand new Cheryl. I've been on for 2 hours and 10 minutes now, so I don't know how long you've been here. I was curious about brown residual water after transferring to self-watering a couple of weeks ago. Brown residual water, it could be your media. It could be your media still leaching out some of the loose sediment after cleaning. I'm not sure how you cleaned your media. It could also be that some of the tannins of the roots that are rotting, I'm not going to say rotting, that's a radical word, but decaying. It could be that. Pumice only. It could be that the pumice, because of its makeup, is giving a little bit off still as the pumice is getting a little bit more softer around the edges before it settles into being the structure it's supposed to be. It's a very porous material, so yeah. Brown is what is making me think. My pumice water was always like a murky color. I wouldn't call it brown, so keep an eye on that. That should have stopped by now. See what happens when you flush more option and let me know. That should get less and less and less unless you're using a lot of seaweed, and seaweed will also leave tannins in the media, being very, very porous. So every once in a while you may get an accumulation in the pot, but as long as there is no smell coming from the pot, Roby, everything's fine. Summer bloomers, that is not thin. No, that is the summer bloomers, Amina. They are thick cuticles. If you put a summer blooming phalaenopsis next to, let's say, even a big oncidium like my Colmenara Masai Red, the cuticles are much thicker, waxier, tighter. And no, that's not a thin-leafed orchid. No, no, do not wipe during the day. Some of under the leaf. I'm only talking under the leaf. During the day, whatever, on top of the leaf is not a problem. When I mentioned that myth, I was speaking of the underside. Okay, some use coffee for Nepenthes as well. So yeah, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to that because you see, Nepenthes, to my understanding, need a lot more water. It's a bog. So there's a different concentration, and the bog doesn't ever sort of, to my understanding, a bog should never dry out. So that would work probably better in those circumstances. But when it comes to orchids, orchids are such light fertilizing plants because of their ever so slow metabolism that the concentration, if it is not really dialed in, even if you have let's say a very low concentration of coffee, then you need the pH. You don't know the balance of the nutrients for an orchid as opposed to, let's say, a bog-like setup of a Nepenthes. So I have some phals that are thin and long, and my other phalaenopsis are wide and rounder. Is it different hybrids or water? No. I would say do not wipe the underside of the leaves of phalaenopsis across the board at night, just to make things straightforward. Whether they're thin or whatever, the cuticle structure, what we consider thin, is completely different as opposed to other thin-leafed orchids per se. All right, so just across the board, phalaenopsis, do not wipe them from dusk to dawn. The roadside rescue, she is going to be in a video on Monday. She's doing great. She is doing great. I've got a problem. That's in a video on Monday. Thank you, brand new Sherelle. You have read my mind. Telepathy. Yeah, the video is already uploaded. Okay, then that is probably something going on in the pot, as long as it doesn't smell, Roby. If you're getting some kind of an odor, then I wouldn't unpot the orchid. I would flush, flush, flush. And being a maxillaria, there's no problem. You can flush a maxillaria. They love their water. You can't overflush them. Charcoal in the pot is fabulous. I don't use it, Desiree Grace, because I don't like to get my hands dirty. I don't like to work with gloves, but it is fabulous. If I didn't have this little attribute, little pet peeve, I would use it. And I would use it to the size as I would use my leca. I wouldn't use big ones, big chunky ones. I would be bashing that thing. I'd be having a great time bashing it to size, because we can't get all the different sizes here. We get big sizes. But yeah, it's good stuff. It really is. It doesn't break down. It's fantastic. No seaweed yet, okay? Just look, flush. Keep the nose to that pot and see what happens, okay? Bad odor, something that smells pungent, that means that there's rot, and then I would definitely take it out. Then I would take the orchid out, even though pumice is not a problem, but you don't want rot to spread. Keep flushing and let me know if it gets better, okay? And let me know which maxillaria it is. I don't know if you told me if it was the tenuifolia. I'm sorry if I don't remember. A bit of talk about previous bark mix, yes. Amina, something, okay. Because I just compare, for example, Tetrasmus and any from garden centers. It looks thinner, but the cuticle structure and characteristics are the same. Yes, okay. They look thinner, more delicate, but what we see with our eyes, that is not, that doesn't count. They can even feel thinner. That doesn't count, okay? They are definitely more waxy. Their whole makeup is different. The stomata are bigger, so we can do a lot more damage with clogging up the pores. So there's a lot going on. Do not just you know, any phalaenopsis. Okay, da-dee-da. Just want to make sure. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm just going back to make sure I've got more comments. I will talk. If you're speaking to me, Sandy, hand hearts, thank you so much. Oh, thank you for the rose. Appreciate it. Oh, Blaze. I'm going to go under my desk right now. Nepenthes are not bog plants. Okay. Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, I'm going to read that. I was just reading it in my mind. Nepenthes are not bog plants. Those are different carnivorous plants. I told you I can't speak on this. I should have stopped right there in my sentence and not gone on and on and on. Oh, I was right when I said I can't speak on this. Stop right there. Nepenthes like to just stay damp, not wet. Okay, not that. Okay, yes. I appreciate that. Thank you, Blaze. Woo. Whew. I need one of them Spanish fans now just to bring down the temperature of my face. Okay. Sorry for not blocking the mic there. Sorry for coughing in your ear if you've got headphones on. No smell, fantastic. You're good to go. Don't worry, it's fine. And you're welcome. And it's a tenuifolia. Fantastic. There you go. You'll be okay. Just, you know, that tenuifolia doesn't mind to get the extra flush here or there. All right. Oh my goodness. Still not recovering. Note to self, tomorrow I'm going to get my Spanish fan next to me just in case I dig myself into another one like that. I need somebody to monitor. When I say I can't speak on it, slam on the brakes. That's it. Oh, this is awesome. This is going to be like for the Ask Me Anything live that I will do every once in a while. Oh. That was a tester there. Anyway, any more questions? If not, oh my goodness. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your participation and, well, your time. Goodness me, your time. So appreciated. By the way, if anybody in the replay crew, if anybody listening to all of this tonight in the chat as well, then starts to think and hear of other myths, put that into any comment section, because I have no problem going with another one like this, maybe in a month or two's time, because there are so many things floating around that in a sense may be true, but they need to be qualified, okay? So if you've got anything that afterwards you get that light bulb moment and you say, I wish I would have remembered it, put that in the comments after the video has processed or in any future video, okay? Bob's your uncle. Maybe he's not. Maybe it's Pedro, but you know what I mean. Oh, gosh. So appreciate having you here. Thank you for the likes. Thank you, Blaze. I appreciate that. You mentioned that. Most likes that I have had in any live stream. Thank you, 21. I'm so happy. I appreciate that support. Have yourselves a fabulous night, late evening, early evening, rest of your day. Know that you are appreciated, and I hope that you're still here. I'm sure that you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop tickling my bulbophyllum disciflorum now. Bye, everybody. Bye. Oh, and stay safe. One condition, please. Stay safe. Bye.